of all, could I congratulate President Macri for chairing a very successful G20 Leaders Summit over the last few days. You will have seen the communique that has been released, which has covered off on all the matters that were able to be addressed over the last few days. I want to come back to those in just a few minutes. But before I do that, for domestic purposes, I have been keeping in very close contact with Australia regarding the bushfire situation in Queensland. The Deputy Prime Minister, along with the Assistant Minister Reynolds, has been visiting the fire-affected areas in central Queensland, North Queensland. Around 100 fires continue to burn. We've had 600 or thereabouts firefighters who've been out there. Some have been fighting these fires for days now, 5 days, with very little rest at all. As you know, we've had firefighters coming from all around the country to assist in these efforts, and I want to thank them most sincerely for their bravery, for their courage, and for their tirelessness as they've gone about protecting communities. And to date, despite the very sad loss of one young man, 21-year-old man, who died while clearing a fire break west of Rockhampton, so far I think the efforts have been extraordinary, and we've been able to minimise the damage. But of course, it is still a very difficult situation. People's lives have been very significantly disrupted by the evacuations and the other actions that have had to be taken, and we would ask for continued patience, not just while the fires are burning, of course, but for many, many days ahead, as there will be the clean-up work and the restoration work that will obviously have to follow. Now, severe to extreme heatwave conditions are forecast for Sunday right across central and northeast Queensland and over the interior regions, and severe fire weather forecasts for Maranoa and Warrego and the Darling Downs and the Granite Belt, and winds are forecast to increase. So we are still expecting many more days of very difficult conditions in all of these areas. And so I continue to ask Australians in those areas to continue to take the appropriate advice, and just remember, as always, to look out for each other, particularly with these heatwave conditions. That may not result in fire directly, but that will, particularly for older Australians and those who are frail, there is a need to ensure that we're keeping an eye on each other and we're looking after each other through what should be a very difficult period of time. So I want to thank particularly the Queensland Government for the work they've been doing, as well as Emergency Management Australia, who have been working closely in managing these issues. Turning back, though, to the G20, well, before I do that, let me also say we also mourn the passing of President Bush. I had the opportunity to forward a note of condolence to the President today, expressing our country's sincere sympathies, both to the American people as well as to the Bush family. President Bush was a great friend of Australia, and he was a great friend of democracy, and he's a great friend of freedom, and he'd advocated and fought for these things all of his life, from his time of service to his country and to freedom during World War II, all the way through his public life and, of course, his service as President. He's a great friend of Australia, and he'll be truly missed by his people, but by all friends of his nation, of which Australia is. And so we express our sincerest condolences to the American people and the Bush family. In terms of the outcomes here, international trade and investment has been once again affirmed here at the G20, and in particular in Part 27 of the communique. These were the very words that Australia has been seeking to ensure were confirmed in the communique, which speak very directly to our interests. I said we have come here because we've come here to secure jobs for Australians. 1 in 5 jobs in Australia is trade related. That's why we're here. The stronger economy that comes from an open trade outlook means jobs for Australians, livelihoods for Australians, and the stronger economy that delivers the essential services Australians rely on. And it was a recognition, as it says, of the contribution that the multilateral trading system provides, but acknowledges that that system is falling short of its objectives and that there is room for improvement and there is need for necessary reform of the WTO to improve its functioning. Now, today I had the opportunity to meet with the Director General of the WTO, as well as a series of bilateral meetings. I've just concluded one with Chancellor Merkel, but prior to that, having had meetings with the Prime Minister of the Netherlands, as well as the Prime Minister of Great Britain earlier this morning, and the President of the EU. And at each of these meetings, there was a strong resolve to ensure that we preserve the rules-based order for multilateral trade. Australia is a great beneficiary of that process, and what I've seen in these meetings, which is an improvement on where we were a few weeks ago, is a greater articulation of the more specific issues that require being addressed as we improve the world trading system. That represents an acknowledgement of issues being raised, whether it's by the United States or China or others, including ourselves, about how that system needs to be modernised and how that system needs to deal with unresolved issues that have held the global trading system back. Also today, in our meeting with particularly the European nations, as well as caught up yesterday with the President of France, has been our focus on the EU Free Trade Agreement. Now, this is the next Premier League deal, free trade deal. We've been successful in securing the arrangements, obviously, with China and Japan and Korea, and the EU Free Trade Agreement, which we began negotiations on earlier this year, today received a very strong accelerator. When we met today, Minister Cormann and I, with our counterparts, we were able to agree to the need to accelerate the development of the EU Free Trade Agreement, and we're looking forward to that advancing promptly now in the months ahead. While I can't give a specific time frame on that, that would be unfair to those officials who I know are already working very hard to progress it very quickly. The machinery of these arrangements will work at a particular speed, but there is no doubt about the political commitment and resolve to address those issues. So it was important to have the opportunity to talk to many of the European leaders for whom they will form part of that agreement and ultimately with the EU. In my discussions with the Prime Minister May, obviously we gave her every encouragement and every support in what she is seeking to achieve in the Brexit arrangements. That arrangement, if unsuccessful, could have very significant implications more broadly for the global economy, but particularly in Europe and the UK, particularly for the UK, and that's why we would want to see those arrangements successfully pursued. But that's a matter ultimately for the Parliament of Great Britain, and we'll see how those issues play out. Now, the Prime Minister is very keen once we get to the end of March for Australia and the UK to be able to start moving forward on an agreement between the UK and Australia. And there was also very strong interest shown in Great Britain joining the TPP. This is something that was first discussed many years ago between Philip Hammond and myself when he was Chancellor, first became Chancellor, I was Treasurer, and we spoke about whether they might be able to participate in the TPP, and that's a ready-made agreement which would offer a lot of opportunities for the UK, but also, I think, add to the great momentum that is building around the TPP. So with that introduction, one last thing I'd mention is, like I said yesterday, our Pacific Step Up initiative received very strong support also from the European nations that I met with today, particularly Great Britain, but also France had indicated that yesterday, and the EU. Our Pacific Step Up provides the opportunity for alignment and Australia's leadership to align the existing contributions, investments that are being made around the sort of strategic objectives which Australia is pursuing through that Step Up initiative. Phil.
The commitment to trade in this communique is nowhere near as strong as last year's, which had such language as fighting protectionism. And there was a lot of debate in the lead up to this one about free and fair trade, and none of those words appear in this one. Is it sort of one step forward, one step sideways?
No, I don't think it's that at all, Phil. I think that's a very incorrect way of looking at it. the discussion and language, I think, of previous communiques, I think we've moved on from. I think there's a willingness. As I said yesterday, I don't think anybody's about protectionism. The allegations that have been made against the United States about protectionism, I don't buy. And what we're trying to achieve here is a modernising and an improvement of the world's trading system, and that's what the communique reflects. So no, I wouldn't take that interpretation at all. I think this is actually a sign that we're moving on from those ideological discussions into quite practical discussions about how we make the world trading system modern and better. And the Director General of the WTO was pretty clear. They're ready to get working. They just need that further political leadership to allow them to start doing that. And when I met with him today, we just worked through some practical issues that would help achieve that. One of the things they have been very impressed with has been Australia's work on e-commerce and setting out new rules and new ways to ensure consistency of how you engage in e-commerce, and Australia is a world leader when it comes to the rules that we're seeking to set around that.
So you don't think the words free and fair trade should have been included?
Well, we're very happy with the words that are here. These are the words that, I mean, I was reading these words out in the first session of the open session of the G20. So these were words that had been being worked on going into the G20, and I think I'm very pleased to see that we're understanding, firstly, the words that had been being worked on going into the G20, and I think I'm very pleased to see that we're understanding, firstly, that trade is an engine of growth, productivity, innovation, job creation and development. It's an acknowledgement of the economic virtues of trade, and then goes on to reassert the importance of the multilateral trading system and the rules-based system, acknowledging that there are weaknesses in that system and that they need to be reformed to fix them. So I think this is a very practical to-do list.
Prime Minister, what do you see as the finish line for tonight's Trump-Xi dinner? What's the point, or what do you need to hear after the dinner to say that's a success from Australia's point of view?
Well, as long as they're talking, as long as they're identifying the practical things that now need to be addressed, then I think that's always a positive, Tim. I think it's unhelpful to impose unrealistic expectations on these meetings, and so long as they're in a room and addressing the fundamental issues that they have, well, that's better than the alternative.
And expect much then, Prime Minister?
Well, it's for them to determine what they're going to do, Tim. They're the ones in the room. They're the ones who they're discussing what the issues are between their economies. We would like, and I've made this clear over weeks now, that the tensions that exist between the G2 run very real risks for the global economy. The IMF has estimated that those tensions could cost global growth as much as 0.7% growth a year. Now, that's serious, and I think both leaders have a very good understanding that it's important that these matters be resolved. But what they do, Tim, is between them.
But you spoke directly to Donald Trump, so can you tell us...
Sorry?
You spoke directly to Donald Trump.
I did.
Did you give any indication at all that he's heading in that direction, that he's likely to be able to break the impasse?
Well, I think he very much wants to break the impasse, and I think ultimately he wants to be able to come to a new deal. That's been his whole point.
Prime Minister, ideally though, can you say that you would like both the US and China to drop the tariffs they've imposed?
Well, I would like them to sort out their differences and enable both countries to move forward and continue to trade happily and prosperously.
In a practical sense, do you want them to drop those tariffs?
Yeah, I want them to be able to resume open trading relationships. Of course I do, and I'm not alone in that. I'd say every economy represented here would want to see that happen. It's a statement of the obvious. There's nothing remarkable about it.
In your discussion with Theresa May, you did address the Middle East policy review. And this summit marks the end of all your international consultations on the matter. I assume drawing close to a final decision. Can you bring the public into your current disposition, having consulted so widely, and also give us some insights into Prime Minister May's attitude?
Well, we had the opportunity to discuss this issue not just with Prime Minister May, but many of the leaders, as I had over the course of the East Asia Summit and APEC as well. And when the Cabinet has concluded its deliberations on the issue, drawing in the inputs that we've had, not just from these meetings, but direct engagements with each of the administrations, then I'll make that decision public.
Prime Minister, one of the other moments of this summit in Middle Eastern affairs was that televised moment between Vladimir Putin and Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. And I know that the murder of the journalist Khashoggi was on the agenda for Theresa May in her discussions with the Saudi Arabian Crown Prince, so I think possibly with murder. Is that an issue that Australia has a view on, the murder of Khashoggi?
Well, we denounced it, and we call for those responsible to be brought to justice.
And has that come up in any of your discussions here at the G20?
It has.
And would you want to elaborate on?
Well, there's not much more to say that it has come up in the general sessions.
So just back to Greg's question, the Prime Minister may express a view on the embassy proposal?
We discussed a whole range of issues.
President Xi today has had about 8 different bilateral meetings.
Yeah.
It's sort of been joked about being the G20 summit. It's been so prolific in finance. How hard is it for you to talk about free trade when so much of the focus is on China and Chinese influence?
Well, it's very easy because it's what we believe in. And we've come here seeking to champion the cause of free and open trade because that's what makes Australia a prosperous country, and 1 in 5 jobs are a result of trade. And I think the fact that we're moving ahead with the EU Free Trade Agreement is a demonstration of our commitment, and the fact that despite the fact that there may be issues between some economies, the rest of the world is getting on with free and open trade because we know it's what delivers the prosperity for our countries. Now, whether it was the discussion I had with Mark Rutte today from the Netherlands or others, I mean, we're all committed to it, and we're getting on with it, and we're going to keep getting on with it. And that's why we're hopeful that the US and China will be able to make progress on their issues, but that doesn't stop the rest of the countries getting on with what's in their economic interests, and that's what we're doing.
Talk about getting on with it, though. There's been about 165 different outcomes on trade since the G20 was founded. The compliance levels of countries like Argentina are 35% or less. How can you say that free trade is happening? It's still an ideological debate.
Well, let's take it back from when APEC started. I mean, APEC has seen the tariffs fall from about 16% to 6% on average. I mean, we've had 1 billion people come out of poverty since 1990 in our own region as a result of greater trade. You know, if anyone can't see the benefits of trade in our own region and how it has continued to create prosperity, they must be reading different economic statistics to the rest of us. We continue to make progress. That's why you have these meetings. You make progress or seek to make progress every time you meet. And I believe at this meeting, again, we've made progress. Sometimes the progress is made simply by bringing issues to a head, as has occurred at APEC. I mean, the issues of the difference were brought to a head, and a very clear light was shone upon it. And I welcome that development as well, because when we have come here to Argentina, I think there was an even greater resolve to ensure that we achieved the consensus we did on these issues today. We're going to have to, yeah, no, you missed out yesterday.
One on domestic politics. Julie Banks has said that she is willing to vote Peter Dutton to the High Court. This is, you've said that you're willing to send other people with constitutional issues there if this is going to be something that's put up. Are you willing to do that? And does that include Julia Banks herself, given there were some issues over the
No, the issues that are germane to the case you raise are different to those that were that relate to Ms. Banks. So no, we have not suggested that. There are 3 other House members that have the same issues that have been suggested about Peter Dutton. So any principled position, any consistent position, anyone seeking to be truly fair about these things would apply the same rule to all of those members, but the government isn't seeking to refer any of those members. But if the Parliament sought to do so, then it would only be the principled thing to do, to apply the same treatment to all members similarly affected. But we might finish on something that has to do with being here in Argentina.
Well, certainly the World Trade Organisation is the architecture by which things are usually resolved.
Yeah.
I just wonder how you can say we're having progress when from last year's G20 to this year's G20, the language there is we will keep markets open, we will continue to fight protectionism, terms of WTO, if this system was working, then the President of the United States would be using WTO, wouldn't he, to resolve his differences with China?
Well, the argument is that, and as this communique demonstrates, Chris, is that the architecture of the WTO needs modernising in order for it to address the very issues you're talking about. And that's why I think where we've got to today is an improvement on where we were last year. If this is the post-ideological position on trade, this isn't about those sort of ideological positions. It's about, okay, we get it. Trade's a good thing. We all want it. That's where we all want to end up. So how do we get there? We need to tidy up some things at the WTO. We need to modernise it. We need to deal with some unfinished business of issues that have caused great frustration to some of the world's biggest trading players. And that's what they're resolving to do. So, as always, I'm the optimist. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks very much.